We would be remiss if we didn't at least get a 10 to 15 minute segment here in on aliens with someone of your caliber. So,
yeah, dude.
You know what I really want to know? Have you listened to Joe Rogan's interview with Bob Lazar?
Yeah.
You did. How much credibility do you think Bob Lazar has in general?
So it's an interesting place to start right here, because
we should probably at least enumerate a bit about Bob Lazar's story, just a minute or so.
Quick thing. So I don't know. I don't know in special insight into Bob Lazar other than what everything people speculate on him, and he has a pretty fantastic story about working at Area 51, seeing craft, maybe even seeing bodies, telling stories about Element 115 and some advanced propulsion system, and Roswell was real. This whole the whole story there, which I take.
And what's interesting about him too is that he cited a couple of things that he said in the 80s, which were like they had a biometric sensor that he had to put his hand on, and it would measure his bones in his hand in order to give him clearance. And then later it was revealed that that was actually a thing. Like they actually used that in certain things in certain institutions in the 80s. So he at least had access to a place where he had knowledge of like some of the biometric systems they used back then.
Yeah,
so,
it's interesting. I think he's most likely a fabulist, but I also think that some aspects of what he's getting at are probably true, right? So, I think you can reject him personally and also hold a decent credence in kind of the broad thrust of what he was saying. And that's getting into a lot of nuance about his personal biography and maybe some credibility.
That's still saying a lot, because what he said, even if you just skim the surface of what Bob Lazar has to say, it's pretty insane.
Yeah, and I think, I wouldn't focus, if you're just getting into the UAP stuff, I would not start with Bob Lazar. I think there's lots of other places to start
go deep, man,
that are much higher fidelity and also a lot more serious. And the place to start is just what's been happening overtly, right, in terms of U.S. government action in the past 2 years. And to do the same way for Bitcoin, I have a brief sociological observation. In the past 5 years, I think both Bitcoin and UAPs as a topic have evolved in the sort of Overton window along a similar trajectory. And there's I think that actually has to do with some dynamics associated with social media and how these types of more somewhat fringe ideas or kind of social organizations can sort of nucleate and create kind of a reinforcing dynamic that can generate through minority rule influence and to propagate through the wider social network and start to have salience in the broader sort of normie discourse, where Bitcoin is now becoming less of a fringe topic and now a normie topic of policy conversation. And there's an ironic synchronicity between the actual policy dynamics where there's a single senator, Senator Gillibrand, who's also been one of the key co-sponsors of crypto legislation with Senator Lummis. And she's also the key co-sponsor of the defining UAP legislation, amendments to the 2022 and 2023 National Defense Authorization Act co-sponsored with Marco Rubio. So I don't think there's any deep state weird conspiracy here. I think that it does show that these two things are indicators of a broader trend, I think, in how these topics can kind of become more to the center of discourse. But UAPs were not memed into existence. The U.S. government has been focused on these topics for decades. And in fact, the recent National Defense Authorization Act, the signature bill that funds our military, has 40 pages of provisions just on UAPs, which is the rebranding for UFOs. And one of those provisions is mandating a report by a new office created inside the Pentagon that reports directly now to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, right? Very kind of very mealy mouth.
Very government.
Yeah. And one of their tasks is to do a comprehensive review of all U.S. government's engagements and reports and studies and programs related to UAPs since January 1st, 1945. So they wrote this into the statute. They've said you have to go back and study. And in part of the this is the authorizing statute language. Part of the study is any attempts by the U.S. government to manipulate public opinion on the subject. So this is Congress is now waking up to this very seriously. The House Select Committee on Intelligence, the HPSI, House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and the SSCI, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, very focused on this. They've gotten a lot of briefings over the number of years. They've seen things that the average public hasn't seen, and they're very, very clued in to this stuff. So the U.S. government has always taken this very seriously, but it's kind of been included from view. And I think in the last 5 years, since 2017, New York Times article, since Lou Elizondo came out and went public, and Christopher Mellon, who's a former Defense Department official, as well came out and started speaking very like overtly about the U.S. government's view of UAPs and the mystery of this phenomenon. So it is a very serious topic being taken very seriously. There are, lots of things happening inside the intelligence community, Defense Department now more overtly, and there's a fight because there's a certain subset of the population inside those communities that don't want to touch this, and there's others that are like, this is a serious issue. The bottom line is like these are real things, and yeah, like it's a slow process of how to come clean, how to make this an acceptable thing, because we don't really know much about it, right? It's one thing to say there's objects flying around. It's another thing
What's one of the more interesting ones, which is more credible than Bob Lazar, was there's a couple of different F-18 naval pilots that were they have a training area right out in the Atlantic, out of Newport Beach, probably somewhere in that area, and they had new radars installed on their jets, so they were seeing more fidelity than they would have otherwise. And they're seeing these same radar pings in a very similar spot every day. And I think one of those pilots was on Joe Rogan as well.
David Fravor.
And one of them,
he was the lead.
What was his name?
David Fravor is like Top Gun, super senior, one of the best pilots in the U.S. Navy.
The crazy thing is they described it as basically being a sphere with a cube inside of it. They were able to get close enough to actually identify those features of it. And multiple pilots had seen that same thing. Just a very, very strange. You could speculate that maybe this is some foreign state with some technology that, or maybe the U.S. government experimenting with something, but why would they put it in that space with those F-18 pilots? Obviously, they wouldn't want them to probably see it if they're trying to keep it secret. Just
moving in the manner that these things do when they're reported.
Yeah, they're
completely outside of the realm of like typical physics and how we understand things to move.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of these incidents. Some of them have been communicated publicly by the witnesses. So Ryan Graves was one of the pilots doing the workups, and he's talked about sort of I think the sphere and the cube that he and some of his pilots saw. David Fravor was in a sort of a tandem workup, and they saw this Tic Tac object, and he sort of tried to do this intercept, and then it like shot off in like 60 miles in 5 seconds and went to his cap point. And demonstrated, on the Spy-1 radar from the USS Princeton, coming from 80,000 feet to 80 feet, and then, doing a lot of sort of hypersonic maneuvers, transmedium. So, like, there's sort of the 5 observables, essentially, that have been characterized by the U.S. government associated with these UAPs, like how they define them as, like, objects, is like hypersonic velocity, transmedium capability, so coming from atmosphere to space to underwater, vice versa.
And going the same speed underwater, too. They've actually tracked some of these things underwater going faster than the speed of sound.
The underwater stuff...
Which, in water is faster than in air.
Is very squirrely. Our underwater sensor detections systems are probably the most classified things we have, going back to Cold War tracking nuclear subs. And so our capabilities there are extremely perishable and very, very secret. So we'll never make those detections. But it has been sort of leaked that we've seen these things called fast movers underwater that are certainly not Russian torpedoes doing some sort of supercavitation, which we know the Russians have supercavitating torpedoes where you can kind of create a little bubble underwater and go, several hundred knots. These are not those things, especially when you correlate an underwater detection with a radar detection with a low Earth orbit satellite detection of like a similar trajectory. That raises some eyebrows.
It's wild.
So that is part of the mission of ARROW, is to do this sort of sensor correlation, which really wasn't being done systematically, is to bring together all these different sensor systems, which are designed for their specific areas, right? Like you have like LEO and GEO satellites, mainly for like missile detection, right? Like sort of, and they do tipping and queuing. So you have a GEO satellite that's like 25,000 miles up in orbit. That's just like looking for, like heat plumes, and then cues in a LEO satellite to like zoom in and actually characterize the vehicle, right? What if it's a Chinese hypersonic system, but they also use AI machine learning systems, and there's a company called Radiance Technologies that's based out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is in UFO lore where the craft was taken, but it's also in actual reality it's not to discount potential Roswell reality, but it's the head of it's where the foreign technology division is, where we like capture and reverse engineer foreign technology. And so the Radiance Technologies is a defense contractor, affiliated with that. And they recently hired 2 folks from the U.S. government that were recently, one like the head of the UAP task force and 2 the chief science officer. And Renaissance Technology specializes in doing basically AI machine learning for our space surveillance architecture. So how to look for objects using our satellite capabilities and characterize them using machine learning. And the basic, gripe has been we've characterized only the objects we were trying to characterize. So everything else was noise and tossed out. Like if it wasn't like obviously like an ICBM or a hypersonic missile, it was meteorite, just throw it in the bin. No analyst even looks at it, right? That's how these systems work. They just generate huge amounts of data, and until someone like asks to build a new classifier for a certain signature, you're not going to look at it. And that's basically what they're doing now. So these are all indications of like serious, like when the machine kicks into gear, defense contractors get spun up. So these like, as far as I know, like real detections. Now what they are, this is like a longer conversation, but like I'd put like 4 categories of explanation exhaust the space. One is like systematic error. One is systematic deception. One is human technology. One is non-human technology. So those are like the 4 options, right? In terms of classes of explanation. Yep. And so as like a principle of Bayesian reasoning, you first say, okay, what's like the prior probability for each of those 4? And then you do empirical investigation. You collect data, you construct models, and you try to understand like how do you revise the probability distribution of your credences across those 4 categories. And so you have to, come and tell the best possible story for what could explain if this was all sensor error. Like all of our radars and various imaging systems and everything, and for eyeballs of pilots are just being wrong. They're just mistaken. It's weather balloons. It's celestial phenomenon. It's whatever. That's one kind of explanation. The second is systematic deception. Like someone is trying to make us believe that these things are real when they're not. So there's some group with capability and intent to systematically manipulate all of our beliefs to make us believe that these things are real, that these detections are real. David Fravor and Ryan Graves, all these guys, they're paid actors. This is all like a psyop.
Right. And you'd have to also believe that these radar systems are hackable remotely somehow, and that
or that
in tandem.
Or that all that's being made up, right? That like everyone's lying about it, basically, right? That it's like one big coordinated psyop. That there's no actual detections of anything. It's just everyone that you've ever heard talking about this is some part of the manipulated deception. If that was true, you have to say, well, that's an impressive deception they've been doing for many decades. Why are they doing that? What else am I being deceived on? So if you believe that, you have to kind of believe a lot of other you have to be skeptical about a lot of other things.
You could devolve real deep into that one.
The third is it's human technology that is in the possession of some entity, right? Some organization, whether it's the United States, China, Russia, Israel, France, Germany, some advanced industrial power, or some breakaway human civilization element that's like made this breakthrough physics and for whatever reason is just like messing around. Like they haven't done anything obvious with it, try to take power or whatever. They're just like, got this crazy advanced technology and they've had it for decades because apparently we've been seeing these things for decades. And, but that's a category of explanation. And the fourth is non-human technology. And that is a bucket for lots of things. That's a bucket for like extraterrestrials, right? Like another advanced civilization that developed this technology and then came here. You could also imagine like a civilization emerging on Earth way before humans were here that got really advanced technology. Most of them left, and they left some probes around to like wait for see what happens. And then we sort of evolved, and they were here before us. Then there was like time travel. They're like human beings from the future just coming, sending some probes back to check on us. There's like interdimensional explanations. This is some aspect of physics we don't understand, and there's some boundary layer that other advanced civilizations or beings can sort of penetrate, and this is what that manifests as. That's like everything goes into that non-human technology bucket. Each one of those subcategories of explanation, requires a whole bunch of investigation, including like look at advanced like physics, right? This is, I think, like to connect back to Bitcoin, like Eric Weinstein, who's had some run-ins with Bitcoin, like his main gripe, and he's given some presentations on UAPs. He's maybe even been sort of briefed on certain aspects of this. Is like this points to like if you take this seriously as like the non-human explanation, it really points to new physics. Like ultimately, technology is downstream of physics. And we've kind of been stalled in terms of our physics knowledge since like the 50s. String theory seems to be a dead end. And like all the breakthrough technologies and technologies we use right now, modern life, is premised on like physics we figured out in the 20s and 30s. So like general relativity, quantum mechanics. And that unlocked this whole new parameter space of technology. And we've just been sort of coasting on that with integrated circuits and better computing. We haven't figured out any new physics. And so like the optimistic take on UAPs is like this would be like a proof of concept that like there is new physics that someone figured out that if we figured it out, we could get that new technology. Like that would be kind of a cool thing. But again, that gets into like wider things. But the bottom line is this is being taken very seriously by the government. There's like now like a whistleblower protection so that people can report, things to Arrow and to Congress if they have engaged in legacy programs that they are covered by non-disclosure agreements that they can't come out publicly talk about. that may be happening soon. ARROW has to do a whole bunch of investigations, develop a science plan, even create like a strike team. So if there's reports of like an incident, they need to send investigators out and collect data in a rigorous way. So this is like being taken very seriously by the U.S. government, and the bureaucracies do what bureaucracies do. They set up an office and they staff it. It takes time, and then it's a political game at a certain point with Congress, wrapping the DoD on the knuckles if they don't feel they're getting full transparency. But that's where we are. I think it's a very interesting topic. I try to pay attention to it because I think, and also it's like it's cool and kind of interesting to talk about. Cool. So